The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today to examine the security challenges brought forth by increased passenger screening, checkpoint wait times. But before I begin my opening statement, I'd like to take a moment of silence for the victims and their families of Egyptair 804. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today we face a crisis at our airports, and we've all read the headlines. 3-hour-long security lines, 430 American Airlines passengers stranded overnight in Chicago O'Hare, travelers from Atlanta, Charlotte, and Alaska waiting forever to be screened, causing missing flights and further delays. More than 3,000 bags failed to get loaded onto planes in time to Phoenix. An 80% increase in wait times at JFK Airport compared to this time last year. This is unacceptable, and it is time for Congress to act. Administrator, the American people are angry and frustrated as we head into the busiest travel season of the year, starting this Memorial Day weekend, and they deserve answers. This crisis didn't just come out of nowhere. Airports and airlines have been sounding the alarm for months. There's no doubt that part of the challenge we face is a high terror threat environment. But wait times are not soaring simply because security is much tighter. It's because the TSA bureaucracy has gotten weaker. The agency has struggled to keep up with the high demand and has been unable to put the right people, the right place, at the right time. Change is not happening fast enough. Admiral Neffenger, I know you are working hard to reform TSA's broken bureaucracy, and today I hope to hear how you will confront this crisis swiftly. But Congress will not sit back as the situation gets worse. And that is why this committee in the House of Representatives passed legislation to fix this problem. I commend my colleague, Mr. Katko, for offering these bills. Among other measures, our legislation would accelerate TSA's pre-check program, which helps reduce wait times by putting low-risk travelers through expedited screening. Unfortunately, the Senate has failed to pass these bills, which in my judgment is unconscionable. And so today, I'd like to send my message to my colleagues in the other body. It's time to get moving because the American people are fed up with this. This week, we will introduce yet another bill to attack this problem, and I hope that this time we can get it to the President's desk more quickly. And in the coming months, we will take a broader look at TSA, including first ever authorization of the agency, which will give us an opportunity to make wider reforms and long-term changes. Additionally, we plan to take up legislation to enhance TSA's screening partnership program. But as I noted, we must also take into account the serious aviation threats that we face. And I think the events of the Egyptian airliner demonstrate that. And although investigators are still working to determine the cause of Egyptair crash, one fact is clear. Terrorists are trying to bring down airplanes, and the aviation sector is their crown jewel target. This month, I led a congressional delegation to the Middle East and Northern Africa to examine the spread of terror safe havens. And we walked away concerned that screening is inadequate at some of these last points of departure airports that have direct flights into the United States. For instance, airports like Cairo lack full-body scanners to detect non-metallic IEDs, and they lack access to comprehensive terror watch lists for screening their employees. This is a concern, we know, because militants are trying to recruit insiders and inside jobs to take down passenger jets. We've seen this twice in recent months, including an attack in Somalia and one against a Russian jet flying out of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. But this is not just a problem in the Middle East or Northern Africa. Just this past December, Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, which has 50 direct flights into the United States every day, they fired 70 employees who were suspected of having extremist connections. 70. We have to get help. We have to help our foreign partners weed out these extremists. Again, the House and this committee passed 2 bills to ramp up security at overseas airports, and yet again, these bills are sitting in the Senate, stalling, waiting for action. It is unconscionable. It's time for the Senate to act, and the President will sign them into law. We cannot afford further delay because American lives are at risk. And as we adapt to the evolving threat, we must also make sure agencies like TSA adapt their business models to keep travel flowing smoothly. Terrorists would like nothing more than for us to undermine our own economy by allowing air transportation to grind to a halt. Admiral Neffenger, we've given TSA the resources it asked for to make screening more efficient. Congress even granted a recent request to reallocate $34 million to hire nearly 800 new TSA officers before July and to pay for additional overtime for existing personnel. Today, we expect you to tell us how you are putting these resources to work and how you're going to address the crisis at our airports once and for all. I want to thank the Admiral for being here today. I want to thank you for your service to our country. And with that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for calling today's hearing. I'd also like to welcome Administrator Neffenger and thank him in advance for his testimony. To be clear, the flying public expects and deserves efficient, safe, secure, reliable air transit. The Transportation Security Administration finds itself at the center of the federal government's effort to ensure secure passage of passenger and cargo. As you know, Mr. Administrator, the importance of this role can hardly be understated. The agency is at a critical point in its short history. TSA is still implementing reforms after covert testing last year revealed serious gaps in security screening. Now, long lines and record wait times at airport checkpoints are having spillover effects throughout our entire aviation system. Passengers are understandably anxious as they hear stories about fellow passengers who, despite their best efforts, missed flights. Asking passengers to arrive 3 hours before a domestic departure is unacceptable. In addition to the stress on passengers to wear the right clothes, decide whether to check a bag, pay exorbitant baggage fees, avoid packing prohibited items, and make tight connections, the stress on the flying public is felt most severely by airline and airport personnel. Unfortunately, it's the men and women who are the face of TSA who get blamed, the transportation security officers. Travel volume substantially increased this year, yet TSA has failed to keep pace with this growth. As a result, there's an insufficient number of transportation security officers in our nation's airport. The current situation where we have too few screeners and far more passengers did not occur without warning. In fiscal year 2011, there were approximately 45,000 TSOs screening 642 million passengers. In FY 2016, TSA had 3,000 fewer TSOs screening roughly 740 million anticipated passengers, almost 100 million more passengers and 3,000 fewer screeners. In FY 2017 budget, TSA requested funding to hire an additional 320 TSOs. To those of us who are familiar with travel volume trends, this did not seem like enough. More recently, TSA, as the chairman indicated, has announced its plan to onboard 768 TSOs by June 15. Increasing staffing resources is certainly a good thing, but only if the proper vetting and training occur before more TSOs are added. Administrator Neffenger, I want to know if TSA has the money necessary to achieve its mission. At Secretary Johnson's request, Congress recently reprogrammed $34 million in TSA accounts to pay for overtime and other costs associated with responding to the wait time crisis. While these funds will surely aid TSA in addressing staffing shortages in the short term, moving money around is not a substitute for infusing new money into an operation. TSA should have access to all of the aviation security fees collected by the flying public to bolster security. Yet the passage of the Budget Act of 2013, TSA is required to divert $13 billion collected in security fees toward the deficit reduction for the next 10 years. This year alone, $1.25 billion has been diverted. Presently, I'm working with Representative Peter DeFazio, the ranking member on the Transportation Committee, in his efforts to ensure that TSA can retain the fees it collects and put them back into our aviation system. In the absence of more money, new resources is absolutely important. Congress and TSA must resist Band-Aid fixes to complicated and security challenges. Patching and plugging holes is not the answer. Moreover, dismantling TSA is not the answer. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are calling for a return to the pre-9/11 privatization model. Mr. Chairman, as you've indicated also, after the downed Egyptian airliner, which is still under investigation, this would not be the way to go. As one prominent airport commissioner recently acknowledged, the benefits of privatization are very marginal, and there's a huge cost in time associated with the transition. We need to look for long-term solution. One solution, as I've indicated and have written a letter to you, Mr. Administrator, is to assign the nearly 2,500 TSOs designated as behavior detection officers to checkpoint screening operation. As you know, this SPOT program has been subject to a GAO review, and it's questionable about its success. But we've spent $1 billion on this program, and we could put that money to good use. So I look forward, Mr. Neffenger, look around the committee room here. All our members use the airports to come to work every week, and I'm sure, like they are anxiously awaiting your testimony. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Other members are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have here today Admiral Neffenger on this very important and timely topic. Admiral Peter Neffenger serves as the 6th Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration, where he leads security operations at more than 450 airports within the United States and a workforce of almost 60,000 employees. Prior to joining TSA, Admiral Neffenger served as the 29th Vice Commandant of the United States Coast Guard and the Coast Guard's Deputy Commandant for Operations. We thank you, sir, for being here today, and we also thank you for your service. Your full written statement will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Admiral Neffenger.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Thompson, distinguished members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I sincerely appreciate the committee's oversight of TSA's security operations and ensuring that our agency has the appropriate resources to accomplish its important counterterrorism mission. Since taking the oath of office on July 4th of last year, I have traveled throughout the country and around the world to meet with employees at all levels of our agency, and they are truly impressive. Their patriotism, their sense of duty, and their commitment to TSA's national security mission is exemplary. But to ensure their success, we need a mature enterprise that delivers the tools they need to get the job done and unwavering support from their leaders. Last week, Egyptair Flight 804 crashed into the Mediterranean, and I want to express my sincere condolences to the families of the victims. It was a tragic loss of life, and while we don't yet know what happened to that airplane, it is a stark reminder of the importance of TSA's daily mission. First and foremost, our job is to protect the traveling public in what has become a very dynamic and challenging threat environment. The threat is very real, and to that end, and in just 10 months, I have undertaken a systematic and deliberate transformation of TSA. I set a renewed focus on security, revised alarm resolution procedures, made investments in new technology, and have retrained the entire workforce. We are holding ourselves accountable to high standards of performance, and I'm supporting our frontline officers in their critical mission. We have reinvigorated our partnerships with the airlines, with airport operators, and the trade and travel industries, and are working closely with Congress and this committee to address our security mission. I am investing in our people, and with the help of Congress, I directed a complete overhaul of our approach to how we train our workforce at all levels of the agency. We established the first ever TSA Academy on January 1st of this year. This intensive training will enable us to achieve consistency, develop a common culture, instill our core values, and raise performance across the entire workforce. I also ordered a review of all personnel policies and practices. This has led to a number of significant changes. Elimination of the arbitrary use of directed reassignments, restrictions on permanent change of station relocation cost, and significant controls on bonuses at all levels. We are overhauling management practices, conducting an independent review of acquisition programs, building a planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process, and building a human capital management system to address recruitment, development, promotion, assignment, and retention. The screening mission requires a similar fundamental reassessment. This year, we project our checkpoints nationwide will screen some 740 million people. By comparison, in 2013, TSA screened 643 million people. That's an increase of 100 million people in just 4 years, while our full-time workforce has reduced by more than 12%. That and our renewed focus on security are significant contributors to the situation we face today. So we have a challenge this summer which we are aggressively meeting head-on. Among other things, we have established a National Incident Command Center to specifically monitor checkpoint screening operations on an hourly basis. We are tracking projected volume, staffing, and lane availability, actual wait times, which will allow us to address critical concerns in real time. This command center includes staffing from airlines and critical industry associations, and they are conducting daily calls with the busiest airports and major airlines to plan that day's operations and what we foresee in the coming days. Our goals are to ensure effective screening and to maximize our screening capacity to achieve shorter line waits. Additionally, we are providing more overtime and 768 new TSA officers. We are also converting, with the help of Congress and the reprogramming request, our frontline officers from part-time to full-time as necessary to immediately increase screening capacity and help improve retention and morale. And I thank you for supporting these efforts. I've given federal security directors the flexibility to redeploy behavior detection officers to perform additional screening functions. And they've done so, and they've pushed the behavioral detection officers back into the screening checkpoints. We have deployed additional canine teams and activated our National Volunteer Deployment Force to be available to move to areas of greatest need. Finally, we are now seeing enrollments in TSA PreCheck that are averaging more than 15,000 new enrollments a day. That's more than almost 3 times what we saw last year at this time. To intensify our agency-wide focus on mission effectiveness, I've brought in new staff from outside the agency. I have a new deputy administrator, a new chief of staff, a new chief of operations, a new head of intelligence, and other key positions. I've also directed several leadership and operational changes at the national, regional, and airport levels. At Chicago O'Hare, a new leadership team is now overseeing screening operations, and with the support and the hard work of the talented workforce at O'Hare, immediate adjustments in addition to some infusion from the reprogramming have dramatically improved passenger throughput, even as volume has increased beyond 90,000 passengers each day. I've directed a fundamental review of the staffing structure of our screening operations. We must match operational capacity to the demands of projected and real screening volume, and we are continuing to work closely with the Department and the Congress to adjust our appropriations to allow us to match resources with mission demands. Finally, in aggressively pursuing long-term solutions to the growing volume of airline travel, we established an innovation task force earlier this year to explore and develop new approaches to airport security. One example is a public-private partnership in Atlanta where the first 2 automated lanes became operational this week, and they were already vastly improving screening effectiveness and efficiency, and we look forward to the results of those the first couple of weeks of that operation. We have similar projects envisioned for other major airport hubs across the country. And the airlines and airports have been huge partners in these efforts. Clearly, the summer travel season is going to be busy, and in the short term, TSA, airlines, airports, Congress, and travelers working together can improve the passenger experience while we maintain security that we need. TSA is dedicated to ensuring better efficiency while remaining acutely focused on our counterterrorism mission. We cannot and we will not compromise on the security of the traveling public. My guiding principles, which I expressed in my administrator's intent, are focus on mission, invest in people, and commit to excellence. We are pursuing these objectives every day. As administrator, I will continue to do so until we achieve and sustain success in every aspect of this agency, in every mission, in every office, in every location where we operate, and with every single employee. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and for the committee's support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. I now recognize myself for questions. Let me just say first, we all Americans experienced the horror on 9/11 of airplanes being turned into cruise missiles and turned against us, bringing down the World Trade Center, hitting the Pentagon, and attempting to hit this building. It still remains the crown jewel of aviation. We know that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is still intent on this. We know that ISIS in the Sinai was able to pull off Sharm el-Sheikh, the downing of a Russian airliner. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I recently had experience to go to northern Sinai where ISIS exists. I also looked at the Cairo airport, which has a daily flight into JFK airport. And I have to say I'm concerned about the state of security there. I'm also concerned of the state of security at Charles de Gaulle, where 70 extremists were weeded out of the process, and we have 50 flights per day flying into the United States. This is the external operation that keeps me up at night. Can you tell me, sir, what TSA is doing to protect these last point of departure airports, particularly in these high-threat areas?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like you, I'm very focused on the safety of inbound flights to the United States. So we look at there are a number of things we do for last point of departure airports. First and foremost is working through the international community to continually try to raise global standards to the highest possible level. In addition, with respect to last point of departure airports, we put additional standards and requirements in place for any aircraft that intends to fly directly to the United States without any intermediate stops. That includes screening of passengers, screening of cargo, screening of the aircraft itself, as well as vetting of any individuals that are on board those flights coming to the United States. In addition to that, following the Metrojet incident, we put a number of additional security measures in place at certain airports of interest and concern in the region that have added significant additional requirements to aircraft and personnel intending to fly directly to the United States from those LPDs.
Well, again, I think this legislation I mentioned that's sitting in the Senate that has not been passed would help you and give you authorities to assist these airports overseas with flights coming directly into the United States, and yet it has not. It's been stalled. You know, when I didn't see full-body scanners in Cairo, that concerns me because of the non-metallic IED threat. Now, this can be fixed, and we can't even share proper intelligence with the Egyptians at that airport to properly vet their own employees and screen passengers. I worry about this, sir, and I hope that I can work with you to expedite this process. And I've met with the Egyptians, the president, and the ambassador, working with them. I think they're working in good faith with the United States to ensure the safety of Americans as well. With respect to the lines, in the president's budget request, there was a request for an additional 350 screeners. However, 2 weeks ago, TSA came back to the Congress and asked to have 34 million reprogrammed, and we granted that request for 768 TSOs, which will come online, I think, by the end of June, I hope, early July. But this was really not our first rodeo. Why didn't we see this coming?
Well, that's a good question, and as you know, when I came on board last year on the heels of the IG's results, it was immediately apparent to me that one of the challenges we were going to have is enough screening staff to man the checkpoints effectively. As you recall, we stopped a practice known as managed inclusion, which was the practice of randomly assigning people out of the standard lanes, unvetted individuals, just randomly assigned to the pre-check lane. One of the discoveries out of our root cause analysis and in working with the IG was that introduced unacceptable risk into the system. In doing that, I knew that that would dramatically increase the number of people back in the standard lanes, and we weren't staffed to the level we needed to man all the lanes possible. So I came to Congress, and Congress was very gracious in granting a request to halt any further reductions. We had planned to drop another 1,600 people in FY16, and then when we got the appropriations bill in December, we immediately began to do accelerated hiring. The additional 768 is on top of what we've requested for FY17, and in my opinion is necessary to meet the near-term challenge of the increased volume this summer and then moving forward. So we've been working very aggressively to move that, but as you know, there's a lag associated with getting the funding and then getting it hired.
Well, and I agree with that, but you have a lot of part-time employees on staff, and do you intend to make a second request to reprogram monies that have already been appropriated to TSA to move part-time employees to full-time?
Well, I think it's important that we move more part-timers to full-time because it drops my attrition rate dramatically and it's instant capability that I can put to use. We're working through the administration now on whether there's a need for a second reprogramming request.
Well, I think about 20% of your employees are part-time. In my judgment, they're already trained to do the job, and it seems to me that would cause overnight would ramp up your personnel force to deal with the long lines, and we anticipate those going into the summer season. As I mentioned earlier, we plan to introduce legislation. We met with 30 airport authorities and over 30 airline representatives. They expressed concerns that there was not the proper coordination at the local level with the field security directors at TSA, that they didn't have flexibility, that the staffing model didn't reflect the peak time that the flights were coming in, and in large part this would solve a lot of these staffing problems if there was better communication at the local level and these local directors were empowered to make decisions based on what's happening at the local airports. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. In fact, one of the first things I did last fall when I brought all my federal security directors together for the first time is to direct them to take responsibility for their local region. I've given them full authority. I like institutionalizing ideas like that so that they stay, because I think that's an important way to go forward.
And that's what this legislation would do. It would require TSA to basically assess its staffing allocation model and also mandate that they get local input from the airlines and the airports. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what we're doing right now, and I'd like to make that a permanent practice at TSA.
Another element in the bill is the TSA's behavioral detection officers who roam around the airport. There are about 3,000 of them. If they can be redeployed to the front screening end process, to me, that would help solve a lot of these problems. I think the ranking member mentioned this in his opening statement. Do you agree that would be an appropriate response?
Well, we are redeploying the behavioral detection officers now. I think it's important to also note that behavioral detection is still an important element, but it's how you use it effectively, I think, that matters. And so I can use those officers directly at things like document checking positions, to serve as divest officers, places where they can still monitor and look at behavior, but at the same time directly contribute to the efficiency of the checkpoint.
And finally, do you support I can't say, do you support the concept of expanding TSA's pre-check program, which I think would move a lot of people in the long lines into the pre-check lines, which I think would solve many of these problems as well?
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of my fundamental priorities is to dramatically expand the pre-check population and dramatically expand the capability to enroll people in pre-check.
And sir, I know they're putting a lot of blame on you for this crisis, but we passed a bill out of this committee to expand the TSA pre-check program which would have helped this situation, and yet it's sitting there in the Senate, stalled in the Senate. They could have helped this problem months ago. And it's unconscionable that the Senate hasn't acted on this, and I call upon the Senate. Sometimes they don't listen to us in the House. But for the sake of the American people, it's time for the Senate to act on this important legislation. With that, I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cedric, put that chart up. Well, I have a chart that kind of crystallized what I think is the challenge that TSA is faced with. In FY11, we had 45,000 TSOs, 642 million passengers. FY16, we have 740 million passengers and only 42,500 TSOs. I guess the question comes to mind, what do you think the number of TSOs you need to address the problem we're faced with now?
Well, thank you for the question. I do think that we are at a lower staffing level than we need to be to meet peak demands at peak periods. And we're working the staffing models now aggressively with the airlines to determine the right number. We're also looking to see what kinds of efficiencies we can gain in just the way we deploy people. So we found in Chicago, for instance, that we converted 100 part-timers to full-time. That's an instant gain of a workforce. We're using overtime hours to effectively convert additional part-timers to full-time. And we're adding a total of 250 officers over the summer, 58 right now. That, in conjunction with some operational adjustments we made, have dramatically improved the situation in Chicago. So I think that I don't have an exact number for you right now because we're reworking our staffing models completely to look at the way in which the airlines do it. But I do know that we need a higher staffing level than we currently have.
And I look forward to you coming up with the number. Do you have presently the resources to address the problems of wait time and other things presently within your budget?
The reprogramming request has helped considerably because it's allowed me to immediately put resources. Right now, the most effective approach is to get part-time to full-time so that I can get trained people working longer hours who want to work longer hours, who'd like to be full-time. That reduces my attrition rate, so it increases my ability to avoid churn. And then it allows me to redeploy some of my K-9 teams to the airports of highest need. That addresses the problem in the top airports, but I don't want to see the problem cascade across the system, which is why we're looking at the potential for whether a second reprogramming request is needed to hire additional.
Thank you. Some people are saying that the wait time has increased substantially after the airlines implemented baggage fees, that people, rather than paying the fees, are taking additional baggage onto the planes to avoid the cost. And therefore, the wait time getting to the plane increases because of the increase in baggage. Have you all looked at that as an issue?
Well, I will tell you, we see about 4 times the number of baggage coming to the checkpoint than get checked. And volume at the checkpoint, the volume of carry-on bags puts a lot of pressure on checkpoint operations. So we've been working aggressively with the airlines to first enforce the 1+1 rule. We think that's very important because if you bring 4 things through the checkpoint, a couple of those things are probably going to get gate checked anyhow.
Well, I think one thing we ought to look at as a committee, the airlines are making several $billion annually off those fees. And if that has contributed to the wait times and additional things, I think we ought to look and see if they can make a contribution toward this effort to alleviate the wait times. I think that's a reasonable thing for us to look at, and I look forward to this committee looking at that as a possibility. I was glad to hear your analysis of the BDOs. There's been a lot of comment and criticism, quite frankly, about their use. And so now if they are being deployed to address this crisis, I compliment you on doing that. With this wait time issue where we are, can you tell me what the airlines are doing to help address this problem as far as TSA is concerned?
Yeah, I've been very pleased with what the airlines have been aggressively doing lately. So quite a few of the airlines have been hiring contract staff to take non-security duties. Everything from sitting at the exit lanes, that frees up a TSO to get back on a checkpoint, providing people to run the bins from one end of the line back to the beginning of the line, doing what's called divest officer duties. That's the individual who reminds people to take off their shoes and their belt and so forth. Turns out that's a pretty important position because a lot of people forget to do it, and that can slow things down if you're not prepared by the time you get there. So that's been very helpful. They're also providing people out in front of the checkpoints to direct people to other checkpoints. What we find is that oftentimes you'll have, particularly in airports where you have limited physical space in which to operate, you have multiple small checkpoints that you can't see from one to the other. And sometimes you'll get a big line in one and there'll be nobody in the next, but human psychology is such that once you're in a line, you don't want to leave that line to go to another one because you might find yourself in a longer one. So catching them before they get in line is important. And finally, the other thing they're helping us do with the huge increase in enrollments that we've seen in pre-check, we have a lot of people who still walk into a standard line not recognizing that that's not going to be an automatic pre-check lane, so you've got to scrub the standard lines to pull people out. As many as 15% of the daily passengers we're finding are walking into a standard lane by mistake, and you got to get them out of there. So the airlines have been very helpful in that respect.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank the ranking member. Chair recognizes Mr. King from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for your testimony here today and for your service. In New York, my understanding is that at JFK Airport, there's an 82% increase in the increased maximum time between 2015 and 2016. Whether that's 82 or 72, it's still extraordinarily high. Can you quantify what impact you expect from the additional new officers you're going to be sending there? In other words, will that 82, will it become 72, 52? Is there any way you can make the equivalency between the additions and subtractions?
Yeah, I don't know if I can put a percentage on it right now for you, but I can tell you we're already seeing a dramatic improvement at JFK. For example, yesterday, the maximum line wait we saw, and it was just a spike, was 39 minutes in a standard lane, and the maximum time we saw in a pre-check lane was 5 minutes. So we're already seeing a dramatic improvement there. We have watched that very carefully. We want to make sure that we see that every day. You had very high volume coming through.
Is that
JFK
because of
yesterday.
increased personnel or because of change in methods?
It's a combination of changing in some operational procedures, so using the personnel more effectively. One of the things that this national incident approach, this national approach to it, allows us to do is rapidly move good ideas around the system. And it's also the combination of some new personnel coming in, shifting some dog teams there. Dog teams help considerably in terms of moving passengers.
And again, if we can try to quantify, your original goal was 25 million for pre-check.
Right.
There's 9 or 10 right now. If you got to 25, what impact would that have?
Well, I think it could dramatically transform the system because then you would have many, many lanes open. That would represent roughly 50% of the daily traveling volume if you got to 25 million people, and you could keep many more lanes open in pre-check. You could run the dogs more effectively in the locations where you still had high volume, but it would be on a smaller crowd of people. So if we can continue to grow that population, I think that's the way. And the other thing it does for me is it gives me a trusted, a known population. That's much more important, particularly in today's world.
Chairman mentioned Egypt Airlines, and maybe this is slightly off topic, but he also mentioned the insider threat. Can you just say what you're doing on that? I know last year there was the IG report. Just so what happened, the Chairman mentioned Charles de Gaulle Airport, where they had to get rid of the 80, 85 personnel. We have almost 1 million people behind the scenes that are insiders. How effective is our vetting process for them?
Well, I think it's far more effective this year than it was even last year. So we've always screened everybody's about there's as you said, just under 1 million people who hold badged access of some type to an airport. It's not universal badged access, and there's varying levels of access. Each one of those individuals is continuously vetted against the terrorist screening database. Since December of this year, we now have full access to the so-called TIDE categories. This is the extended database of interest that doesn't necessarily indicate that you're connected to a known or suspected terrorist, but there may be indicators. We now do recurrent vetting against that as well. We're piloting a project with Delta Airlines and 2 large airports to do now recurrent vetting against criminal databases, the so-called FBI Rat-Back program. The current requirement is every 2 years. I want that to be recurrent as well. Assuming that goes well, then we will implement that full-time by the end of the calendar year, and that will be continuous vetting against the criminal databases as well.
So are there training procedures in place for cooperation between the TSA personnel and the armed police at the airports? Because TSA obviously is not armed. They can't make arrests. If they do spot something, how quick is the time response with the police officers?
Well, it can vary by airport, but we've got duress alarms at every checkpoint on every single lane of every checkpoint in the nation. We completed the installation of those just before the end of the calendar year. We train every day with police departments. In fact, I just met with the Association of Law Enforcement officers at their annual conference, and one of the topics was a discussion for consistent training across, and it's everything from active shooter training to response to emergencies to clearing contraband items that are discovered at the checkpoint. But I think we have a very good relationship, particularly in the largest airports where the potential for greatest concern can be.
When you have nothing else to do, if you could do me a favor and just check out what the relationship is between TSA and the Port Authority Police of New York and New Jersey.
Yes, sir, I will.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Thank the chairman and the ranking member for this hearing. Admiral, thank you again for your service. I've often said in this committee and said to TSOs and others that the Transportation Security Administration are the first responders of aviation security. And I believe that's important to convey to your management, to you, and to certainly the line officers, supervisors, and others who go out every day to do this great work. I also want to acknowledge the chairman and ranking member of this committee, because they have led an enormously bipartisan committee that only focus or main focus is the security of the nation. This makes this a pleasant experience because we are committed to getting the job done, if you will. We want to get the job done with you, and so I want to emphasize a thought that it's difficult to call yourself the reprogrammed government. It's hard to reprogram for infectious diseases. It's hard to reprogram for military. It's hard to reprogram for the security of the nation, particularly in aviation security. So I understand that we may be getting 700 TSOs coming this summer. I want to follow the line of questioning that our ranking member had with this particular graph here, and it is stark between 2011 and FY16, particularly with the increase in travelers, and I think we might even get any more. So can you, I understand we may be getting 700, I understand that we may be getting at a point 1,600 and then 2,500. Can you put that in perspective of when these numbers will come to add to the TSOs?
Yes, ma'am. The 768 that we're hiring right now should all be on board by June 15th. So we're hiring them now. So they're rolling into the system, but we should have them all trained and on board by June 15th.
June 15th. All right.
That's right. And then they will add to that. That's in addition to the normal hiring that we're already doing. So that's on top of the 200 new officers a week that we're putting out of training currently.
So is that FY16? Can we expect 1,600 and then 2,500? I had these numbers.
Well, the 1,600 was the number I was scheduled to lose in FY16. So Congress allowed me to keep that number. So we had already.
That's somewhat of a plus, but you didn't lose them. So that's 1,600.
Didn't lose them. Yes, ma'am.
And then what's the 25?
So this 768 is a plus on top of that 1,600 that we would have lost, and we had already cut some into that number to meet the FY16 targets. We had to hire back some of those.
Does that make the 2,500? additional, or obviously 17 and 7 is, I mean, 16 and 7 is 23, but
Right, that's
what do you
about-
think you're going to get in FY16?
Well, I think we'll get that. We'll keep the 1,600 plus the 768 on top of that. So that gives us roughly the 2,400 or
Correct.
so in
And
FY16.
does that include the potential reassignment, redeploying of BDOs, which I think is an excellent idea, particularly having them be at a point where they can assess, in a stationary point where they can assess almost every individual that comes through?
No, that gives me additional capability on top of that. Now that's real capability right now. So we're moving those in right now. And then the conversion of part-time to full-time. As you know, we have quite a few part-timers that would love to be full-time, but eventually they can't wait long enough for a full-time position to open, so we lose them. So we have a high attrition rate in our part-time workforce.
Let me ask a series of questions, see if you can. I congratulate you on Flexi. One of my concerns is training, training not only the new recruits, but training the existing TSOs, and that ties into the numbers that we reflected on dealing with accuracy. I'll just make that general point. I'd be interested in your work on accuracy and also on the training. I would hope that we could actively engage in training ex-military, and I indicated some time ago college recruits. I'd like you to comment on that. The last question is, Chicago was the epicenter. Everybody's eyes were on Chicago besides Arizona and the equipment failure. If you can finish your questions by saying, what is the appointed and immediate response to Chicago, which is an example of what other cities are facing?
So immediately in Chicago, and this is, so when I talk about Chicago, understand we're also doing the same thing at the other top airports, because well, Chicago was a preventable incident in my opinion. When you look at what happened, this was a surge that was anticipated, was known. It was a failure to get some things done in advance of that, and we've proved that by fixing it pretty quickly. So in Chicago, among other things, we had already planned to put additional officers in there. So of that 768, 58 of those individuals are coming into Chicago by the end of this week. So there'll be a total of 58 new. We converted 100 of our part-time officers to full-time officers, and we pushed a lot of overtime hours there so that they can use overtime hours. You have to be careful with overtime. You don't want to burn up your full-time workforce, but it's very effective at taking part-timers and giving them more hours, and many of them want those. And we also moved some additional K-9 teams. These were K-9 teams that we had planned to be moving. We just accelerated their move into Chicago. The total of that has resulted in a significant change in the Chicago picture. The Chicago Tribune reported in today's paper that the longest wait time was 15 minutes yesterday, and that was with significantly higher volume. So it tells me that with some targeted additional resources, efficient use of those resources, and then a management team that understands how to run that daily tactical operation, you can make a big difference. And that's what we're doing at each of the big airports right now. Recruitment, fortunately, right now, we do not seem to have trouble meeting our recruiting targets. We have a large pool of people that have been pre-vetted. That's why we were able to rapidly begin to hire that 768, because we had a large pool of available applicants that had been screened that were looking for work. I still want to work on bringing more of that back in-house than is currently done. As you know, we work through a private contractor to do our hiring and recruiting right now.
I'll get your other answers in writing regarding the institute that in Georgia, Flexi, about how you can utilize that better. And let me just conclude by thanking the TSOs all across America for the great service that they do for this nation. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Rogers from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral, thank you for being here and for your service to our country. I think you're a good man, a competent man who's been given an impossible task to administer the TSA. The TSA has wallowed in its own bureaucracy for more than a decade, and over that period of time, it's built up a lot of bad habits that have come to fester. You spoke in your opening statement about making the TSA more responsive organization, leaner and smarter, and I want to help you do that. To that end, I plan to introduce legislation to transform TSA from an HR nightmare into a security-focused organization by reforming and greatly expanding the screening partnership program. Having worked on these issues for more than a decade, I've seen that TSA can do a mission when it's given a clear, succinct mission. My bill is going to allow more airports to hire qualified private contractors capable of managing day-to-day operations and make TSA the driving force to oversee intelligence-based security strategies. These changes will get more out of your organization than any summer rush Band-Aid bill could ever do. You can spend your time conducting covert testing and building effective strategies instead of trying to decide who's going to work the morning shift at Reagan Airport. To that end, I want to talk to you about the SPP program. Last year, the GAO determined that TSA is not fairly comparing the cost of government-run screening operations with their privately run SPP counterparts. In November, I requested that TSA release more accurate cost data to Congress and GAO. Your agency promised to deliver that information within 6 months, but it never came. In March, I asked you personally for the data during a budget hearing, and then sent you a letter to remind you of that. It still hasn't showed up. It's been 191 days since I requested that information. Can you tell me when I'm going to receive the accurate cost comparison that GAO says we need to get?
Yes, sir, and as you know, I agreed with GAO that we needed to do a better job. GAO set a deadline for us of the end of June, and we're working very closely with them in order to meet that deadline, and we're on target to meet that deadline. We've been meeting with GAO regularly to ensure that they concur with what we're finding, and that it meets the recommendation that they made, as well as an accurate accounting of the costs, because I need the same thing. And
So by the end of June, I can count on seeing that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're on target to meet that deadline.
Excellent. Next, you talked about the canine screening programs, and you know I'm a big fan of that technology and believe it's the most effective that we have in our toolbox. But I went out to Lackland a couple of months ago. I've been out there several times, but was looking at some of the training they're doing, what y'all refer to as passenger screening canines. Mm-hmm. And that's been held out by TSA to me as being the same as vaporweight canines. And in fact, what I saw was nothing comparable to vaporweight canines. They were training canines to basically work the lines at an airport, which means you have to go up to the passenger. The canine has to go either smell them personally or ride at them. As you know from vaporweight canine technology, which we use here at the Capitol, used over at Union Station, is used at the Grand Central Station in Washington, many places, the canine doesn't have to come close to the passenger. They can just detect the air for up to 15 or 20 minutes after a passenger has disturbed it. Can you tell me why that technology is being trained at Lackland in that more narrow scope instead of the more effective vaporweight training?
Well, I'll get you a fuller answer for the record, but here's how I understand it, and I caution that I'm speaking without the benefit of an expert next to me. But when you look at a passenger screening line, it's a slightly different dynamic because you got an enclosed line of people. So as I watch those dogs operate, they're actually what they're doing is if you notice, they're moving their head around a lot because they're checking for vapor. We typically put enclosed panels next to the stanchions where possible, or enclose the checkpoint behind a panel. And so the dog is doing two things. It's both checking the vapor as somebody goes by them, but it's also sniffing the general vapor in the air. And so my understanding is that they had to modify it somewhat for the very specific nature of the way people line up in queues. But let me get you a better and more complete answer to that.
Yeah, as you know, that's fine, and that's much better than doing nothing, and it's much better than the equipment we use. Mm-hmm. But as you know, you can put these assets out in a foyer area before people even get to the line, and they can detect the air that's been disturbed by somebody who's walked by in recent 15 or 20 minutes without having to come up to the person. That's a very valuable deterrent. And also putting him past the checkpoint in case the machine doesn't detect something. And these, again, are assets that don't have to come up to the person. And unfortunately, that for some people, it's uncomfortable to have a dog come up and smell them. Wouldn't bother me. I'm from Alabama. But now some folks would be bothered by it.
Yes, sir.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this very important hearing. Admiral, thank you for your testimony and for your service to our country. I agree with my colleague that you have an impossible task on your hands, but an important one. Clearly, the wait times at airports that the traveling public are having to deal with are unacceptable. Certainly, my constituents and people around the country are demanding quicker lines, and I know that is our goal. One of the priorities that you and Secretary Johnson laid out as part of your 10-point plan is doubling down on R&D at TSA. And I appreciate the promise of new technology to expedite screening, but can you preview some of what we can expect?
Well, thanks for that. I do think we need to do a better job of both research, development, and incentivizing the private sector to come forward with ideas. But here's an example, I think, of what we can see. If you look at the Atlanta airport today, we opened 2 new automated screening lanes down there. This is not something new. It's been in use in Europe for a number of years. But these are instead, if you think about a standard lane, you walk up to a lane and there's a table there. You put your stuff up on the table and you slide it along the table until you can engage the conveyor belt. This is a fully automated system. The bin returns automatically. It's got an RFID tag and a barcode that ties it directly to you. There's a photograph taken of your stuff as well as an X-ray, and it takes off automatically. There are 5 stations at which people can line up, so you don't have to go single file. You can take 5 people at a time up to the checkpoint. They cycle in as they fill their bins up, and it goes through. London Heathrow has said that they've seen, on average, anywhere from a 20 to 25% increase in throughput at the same level of effectiveness. So we're very excited about that. I think that as you look at increasing passenger volumes, at some point you reach capacity with a manual system, and then you have to look to automate things. I think that the TSA needs to work closely with the system to get it more automated and to bring more technology in.
Could I ask you on that point on the automated part, just so I'm clear? So that part is automated, but there's still a human, a person in the loop actually looking at what's in the carry-on baggage that's being screened?
There's still somebody reading an X-ray right now. We're also working with software companies to determine how effective machines can become at identifying prohibited items, so that you can put humans into the work that humans do best, while at the same time, moving machines out to what they do best. We're also looking at changing the way we do identity matching. When I look around an airport and I see all those kiosks that distribute boarding passes, there's typically some type of an ID reader on all of those. If you can get ID reading technology into there, there's things we can do that can automate the identity check process as well.
Okay. So let me shift over to one other thing. I may come back to technology in a minute, but so TSA has publicly stated its goal for pre-check is having 25 million enrollees. I know my colleague, Mr. King, asked about the enrollees in the pre-check system and what that would mean if we actually had 25 million. But right now, currently TSA only has 2.76 million people enrolled. What is TSA's plan for expanding pre-check to further reach that goal of 25 million enrollees?
And I just want to clarify, the 25 million is all trusted travelers, so that would include Global Entry, Nexus, and Sentry. Right now, we're at about 9.5 million of total trusted travelers. These are people who have enrolled in some program of the federal government. So there are a couple things we need to do. First of all is to expand the enrollment opportunities. I don't think we have enough enrollment centers out there. We're working with we currently have one vendor that provides the contract enrollment services. I'm hoping to expand that this year to additional vendors under a new contract. The second thing is to make those centers more available, to do more mobile enrollment, to streamline even further the application process. We do have an online application process now, but you still have to show up to do your fingerprints. And then we're working with airlines and traveler reward programs. Many of the airlines are now offering mile redemption for pre-check. Microsoft Corporation recently bought pre-check for all of its travelers. And many of the travel reward programs are providing the ability to trade in your miles or points for pre-check.
So currently to enroll in pre-check, an individual has to pay a fee of $85 to be enrolled for 5 years. However, for those that fly once or twice a year, this may not be feasible or practical and could distract from TSA's efforts to broaden enrollment. Has TSA thought of any alternatives to paying $85 for pre-check? Can you detail any thoughts on that?
Well, most of those fees go directly to cover program costs right now. So it would be challenging to, under the existing contract, to change the fee structure. That's why we encourage people to look at if they're members of trusted traveler programs of some sort, then there's opportunities being offered through various programs to get direct reimbursement or direct vouchers for pre-check.
I know my time's expired. I just, if you could on a follow-up, perhaps in writing, going back to the technology issue, in deploying new screening technology, I wonder how we can ensure that we avoid the mistakes of AIT. So I know my time's expired, but I'll yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Admiral. Let's talk about bonuses a little bit. TSA requested almost $80 million for bonuses and performance awards for FY 2017. As I'm sure you're aware, it's been revealed that the assistant administrator received almost $90,000 in bonuses over a 13-month period. Let's just start with what do you do to get a bonus? What do you do? What did the assistant administrator do to receive $90,000 in just bonus? Right. So we're talking. I don't know what the rate is for an inspector, but at least one. Right. We could have hired one with the bonus. And what I think most of the American people view as a historic critical failure right now, looking at the lines and the throughput, I wonder what you got to do to get a bonus at TSA, and I think they're wondering what we got to do.
Well, I wasn't here then, as you know, and when I discovered that, in my opinion, that's completely unjustifiable. I think it's appropriate to have the ability to reward good performers
Sure.
in any line of business. And so my belief is, first of all, you follow existing policy in OPM. And so the first thing I did was eliminated the practice of multiple bonuses to any one individual. And so I've dramatically changed that. And my goal is to push more reward bonuses out to the people in the organization that do some of the real frontline work. So I can't justify the level of bonuses that were provided in the past. I can tell you I stopped that, and I watch it very carefully, and I put significant management controls on it, including requiring oversight by the Department of Homeland Security of anything. I don't want anything happening inside TSA when it comes to bonuses to senior executives.
So, okay, so the program does still exist, I think, to a certain
Right, because it's a
extent,
program across the federal government.
Right. Do you know, if you do know, how much was spent by TSA last fiscal year on bonuses? I'm trying to juxtapose that with a $34 million reprogramming for 768 inspectors, and just trying to get
I don't have the number on the top of my head. I'll get you the number for the record, sir, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
All right, well, thank you for that. Moving on, there was a GAO report regarding employee misconduct, specifically attendance and leave. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they found that penalties for misconduct and failure to attend were lower than TSA's own guidance and recommendations. Let me just ask you this, if you know, and if you've done any of your own studies, do unexcused absences and tardiness create problems in staffing, in effectively staffing checkpoints?
It can. It depends on the extent to which it happens, and it depends on what the reasons are for it. But if you have significant numbers of
Sure.
unexpected, it will dramatically affect your ability to staff.
And so, of course, that is directly correlated to increased wait times if folks aren't there. Do you know if that's something that has impacted to the point that you're taking a look at that?
We are taking a look at it. One of my concerns is that we understand if we don't have staff in place when we expect to have them in place, what's the reason behind that? Did we inadvertently give people leave when we shouldn't have given them leave, or did they just not show up? And if they didn't show up, what would be the reason for that? That's all part of the calculus to determine, how you are ready for a daily tactical operation.
Do you know what some of the disciplinary actions are for employees with unexcused absence or excessive tardiness? Do you know some of what actions you would take? Because the report said that the penalties for misconduct in the past had been lower than generally lower than the guidance than the own guidance by TSA.
Well, as I look at it, and I think back to my military experience, when you get guidance, sometimes that guidance will give you the maximum penalty allowable, and you may or may not need to assign that. So I think it really is a case-by-case look. If you've got some specific cases that you're interested in, I mean, I'll happy to take that for the record. But my opinion is this: there may be a valid reason why somebody doesn't show up on time, even if it caused you some real problems for them not showing up. and maybe they should have called, they didn't call. So the level of discipline or punishment you give really is a case-by-case study. It's hard to give a blanket answer.
I understand. I was kind of looking for a range there, but, and you probably know that the subcommittee that I chair, we're conducting our investigation into the misconduct and, of course, the penalties associated with, and potential correlation with increased wait times. And we'll be looking forward to working with you.
No, same. I'm very interested in this problem because I want to get to the root of management issues throughout the organization.
Appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You yield back.
Recognizes Mrs. Watson Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Neffenger.
Thank you.
You have an incredibly difficult job, and I'm glad that you're the one that's in it. I'm very concerned about the wait times. I really do believe that the airlines, by allowing people to carry 2 and 3 bags instead of 1 bag when they're carrying one to the on the aircraft, contributes to the wait, the amount of time it takes to go through the lines. I know you need additional resources, and I'm really interested in knowing at some point the answer to Mr. Thompson's question about how many do you think that you need. I know that it's uneven sometimes in going through even the pre-check lines where they're telling you take your shoes off and take your belt off. And I'm like, I thought that's why I was in pre-check, that I wouldn't have to do that. So I'm happy that you have an academy and that you're training people now. I've got an issue, I've got a question about this issue of partnerships, because there have been a few instances where airports have threatened to privatize as an alternative to federalized screeners, which I'm more comfortable with, sir. There have also been articles and statements from those who believe that the SPP provides marginal, if any, benefit in terms of reducing wait times. Is there any measurable difference between the use of screening partnerships programs versus federalized screeners? Or is the problem a resource problem that would be shared by TSA and private screeners alike? And could we be certain that they would be equally as concerned with the security measure as they would be with the convenience of getting through the lines quicker?
Well, thanks for the question. First, it's important to understand that even a private screening contractor works for the TSA. It's contracted to the federal government, contracted to TSA, and there's a TSA management staff that runs that. I think that's important because from my perspective, the national security is a federal function, and you need national standards when it comes to that. In my mind, so when you look at performance, it's roughly the same from a private. We train them to the same standards. In fact, they train at our TSA Academy. From my perspective, the flexibility I get with a federal workforce is, so this national deployment force I mentioned, these are TSOs who have volunteered to be deployable for surge events and for others, but we have about 250 of those. I can do that with a federal workforce. I can't reach into a private workforce without working a contract issue. So if I need to surge, it gives me the ability to do that. And I can also move personnel more rapidly from place to place as I need to. So from my perspective, that's a benefit as a manager of having a workforce that works directly for me versus contracted to me.
Thank you. You talked about the fact that there's only one vendor that you work with on the pre-check program, and that the $85 that one has to pay really only covers the administrative expenses. So when you are going to expand this opportunity to other vendors, do you think that will create competition and reduce the costs associated with that?
I really hope so. In fact, that was one of the things that we built into the request for proposal was to look for ways to reduce the fee, and I think competition can do that.
Or if not reduce the fee, at least allow some of that fee to be used to ensure that you all have the resources you need to do the job that needs to be done.
Right. I think what we looked for were flexible options for how you would fund this and pay for it in a different way.
TSO employees, I know that the part-time employment is something that you really have a lot of turnover in because people need full-time jobs. But I'd like to know how much an incoming TSO gets as a full-time employee. What is that salary?
I don't want to get the number wrong off the top of my head. It depends upon location, obviously, because they get locality pay to try to make it equivalent. Let me get you the number for the record. I want to say it's around 30,000, but let me get that number for the
Do
record.
you have a high turnover rate in the full-time employees?
No, actually, our full-time workforce is pretty stable. It runs between 8 and 9%. But we have about a 25% turnover rate in the part-time workforce.
One of my colleagues mentioned the relationship you have with the police. I think it was Mr. King particularly singling out the Port Authority Police of New York and New Jersey. And I had meetings with them, and they tell me that there's like one police officer assigned to a terminal. Do you find that there's enough police capacity and support in the terminals?
Well, I've been looking at that pretty hard, and as I travel around, I meet with the various law enforcement agencies that work in the airports. Some have more capacity than others. There's no doubt about that. But I'm finding in the large airports that for the most part, they understand their mission. They take it very seriously. They're working in the public areas of the airport. We also have a reimbursement program, as you know, which reimburses them for the time that they spend in and around the checkpoints. And as I said, we put duress alarms into every single checkpoint in the country to ensure that there's as rapid a response as possible in the event of an emergency.
Mr. Neffenger, I just need you to know that I agree that you've got an extremely important job to do. And for me, I don't care sometimes about being inconvenient. I want to get on the airplane and know I'm going to get there safely. And I appreciate what you have to contend with. I just want to make sure that I understand what you need so that I can fight for what you need to make sure that we are safe and that your agency has the resources it needs.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the chairman of the Transportation Subcommittee, Mr. Katko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neffenger, good morning. And I want to state preliminarily, I appreciate the collaborative effort we're working on with my subcommittee. In fact, we met for an hour and a half the other day at your offices, and I appreciate the frank discussions and the give and take and your commitment to trying to get things done and putting politics aside, and I appreciate that. But something kind of piqued my curiosity when we were talking today, and that is the fees surrounding pre-check. There's a pre-check bill sitting over in the Senate now that is ostensibly because the senator wants the fees to go to the general treasury that are generated from the pre-check fee. So I want to talk about those fees a second and tell me, what does that $85 go towards?
As I said, it primarily covers the full program cost. So there's a component that pays the FBI, reimburses the FBI for the background checks that they do, and that's a fixed fee that the FBI charges to conduct the background checks. There's a component of the fee that covers TSA's administrative costs because it's a self-funding program, so it pays for the overhead and the staff and the administrative staff to do that. And then the bulk of the fee then goes to the vendor to cover their costs. Both for the physical enrollment centers and their personnel.
Okay, so if that $85 was taken away and goes right to the general treasury, who would pay for all those costs? Would it be TSA? Would it not?
Well, we'd have to find the money someplace.
Okay, so let's say if $85 is in fact the cost, and you want to enroll 10 more people, that means $850 million you would have to find somewhere else in your budget. Is that right?
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
It's kind of insane, isn't it? Think of that.
Well, I like self-funded programs.
Okay, so the bottom line is with this bill that's sitting over in the Senate, I just want to make sure I understand it. It directs TSA to partner more closely with the private sector and have basically competition, if you will, in the pre-check program, and that would help drive costs down. That's a goal of it. So with that being said, do you believe that bill would help you achieve the higher numbers with pre-check?
Well, what that bill does is codify what we're trying to do right now, which is to increase competition in the private sector, with the hope of that competition driving the cost down.
Okay. All right. So, okay, good enough. Now, with respect to, I want to talk to you just for a second about the bonuses that were given out. Is there a system at TSA that whereby subordinates can nominate superiors for bonuses or put them in for bonuses?
Apparently, there was a system that allowed that. That system doesn't exist under my leadership.
So you've stopped that?
I absolutely have.
Okay,
yes.
there was a system you stopped at, and I commend you for doing that. That seems incongruous to me. It just doesn't. I don't understand how.
No, right now it requires approval by me and then seconding by the department for any bonuses awarded to senior executives.
Okay, and if I may switch gears one more time, because I know you've touched on a lot of different topics, so I want to expand a little bit here. The ICAO is an international organization that basically certifies a minimum level of competence for airports. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you rely on once somebody hits the ICAO level, that's it, and that's all you care about?
Well, as you know, we're a signatory to the ICAO treaty, and that sets a standard around the world for security. From my perspective, I think you have to continuously pay attention to these standards and try to drive them up even higher. In fact, I recently met with the ICAO Council in Montreal. As you know, there's a General Assembly this year, and I pushed for an aggressive security agenda at the General Assembly, and we intend to continue to drive that. In advance of that, we look at every place that services the U.S. directly, and we put significant additional requirements in place to ensure that we're comfortable with the screening and overview standards that they're using.
Okay, so I just want to ask a couple of things about that. With respect to these last point of departure airports, LPDs, you know we have a bill that's been submitted and it's over in the Senate now, waiting approval. That's why I'm interested in this area a little bit. How important are these LPDs to have body scanners at the airports?
Well, I think body scanners may be the right answer depending upon where you're looking. What I'm most concerned with, are they effectively screening? I can understand why some places might not have a full body scanner, but if they don't have one, then they have to have some other things in place to be equivalent to that. So you can do that by full body pat downs. You can do that by explosive trace detection. There's lots of other means to do that.
Is it explosive trace detection equipment important to have at these airports?
Again, if we like to see that, and we've been working with ICAO and other foreign partners to push that type of equipment out. In the absence of that, then I want to see some very stringent additional requirements that would make up for the lack of that as we try to build that capacity.
How about document verification machines, kind of trying to authenticate documents that are coming through? Are they important as well? Same answer?
Well, that's important to me. If somebody's flying to the United States, I want to know who they are.
Okay. So if you took all three, if you had an airport that didn't have body scanners and didn't have explosive trace detection equipment, didn't have document verification machines, and had troublesome, if not incompetent canine teams, but those types of airports that have those things lacking, would they be a cause of concern to you?
I would pay very close attention to airports like that. I want to be sure that they meet appropriate standards for us.
Okay, and then the last thing I'll ask about this, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman, and that is the personnel at those airports. Is it important for you to know how those personnel are trained and whether or not they're giving adequate security background checks?
And that's part of what we try to verify when we go into foreign last points of departure to determine, are they meeting standards that are appropriate for us to fly into this country.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the ranking member. Administrator Neffenger, you have a very difficult job here, and just want you to know that a lot of us appreciate your efforts in making sure that the final checkpoint before our citizens get onto airplanes are safe, along with the TSOs. You indicated that the TSOs with the behavioral detection training are being integrated into checkpoint as document checkers. You also said that the FSDs have been granted unprecedented flexibility. Would you have a problem with the FSDs using a BDO for checkpoint screening itself?
If they determine that that's their highest need at that moment, I have no problem with that. They have that authority to do that.
Okay. In April, the FAA announced that they would be redesignating Newark Liberty International Airport, which is in my district, as a level 2 slot controlled airport starting in October, potentially increasing the number of flights arriving and departing from the hub. How is TSA prepared to deal with the increased air traffic and the larger number of passengers that will come in with this designation? And I know there have been great efforts over the past week to alleviate some of the time in Newark, and we appreciate you looking at that and trying to be helpful as possible. But if this comes in October, naturally, you know, what we've done to this point will need to be reevaluated and looked at again. I know several TSOs are coming online as well as we move forward. But what would you do to take a look at that, knowing that this is going to change?
Yes, sir. And in fact, what this increased collaboration with the airlines and the airports is helping us to foresee problems like this in a way that we hadn't in the past. I don't want to get caught by surprise by something like that, because as you say, if you increase flights dramatically, we've got to be prepared to receive those. So we've been working very closely with the airlines and that airport to understand what that might look like, when we think we'll begin to see that, so we can get well in advance of that. And I know that a couple of the major airlines there are already considering some things that they might do with respect to increased automation at the checkpoint, increasing the availability of checkpoint lanes, and we're pushing resources into Newark, and we'll continue to do so.
We had an incredible subcommittee hearing that Mr. Katko chaired just the other day, where we had several of the airports come in and really share with us. And I think with the chairman there and Mr. Katko, heard a willingness to try to work with TSA on these issues. So, and there were quite a few major airports and hubs that were here to speak. So moving forward, we'd like to continue to get that collaboration.
Yes, sir.
That we think that might not have been there to this point, or not to the level that it needs to be. And let me just say also, I've been echoing this every opportunity that I've gotten in the past several days. We really need to look at our TSOs and see what the compensation level is for them. They have a very important job. They're the last line of defense for some catastrophic situation to happen. And, you know, I don't know how many people can raise a family, you know, on what we might think is $30,000 in this country. So we need to even look at the compensation of the TSOs and understanding that they have a thankless job, first of all. They're on the front lines, and they should be compensated in a manner which the importance of their job is. So,
I would agree.
thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral Neffenger. At the beginning of your testimony, you said your first point of focus is a focus on the mission. I pulled up your mission statement for TSA, and it says, protect the nation's transportation systems to ensure freedom of movement for people and commerce. I've been reading reports that your agents, in the midst of this crisis of making sure in the increasing terrorism threat that people are able to fly safe, we don't have another terrorist attack in America, and that also people are able to move quickly to get to where they need to be. But I've seen reports that your agents are being pulled to support things like presidential campaign events, concerts, sporting events, and other things. I don't see that anywhere within your core mission and your core responsibilities. So my first question is, under what authority is TSA screening Americans on their way into a sporting or concert or presidential campaign rally? And secondly, where does that fit into the priorities? If everything we've heard today about the importance of keeping our transportation safe and making sure that people can get there in a timely manner in this manning sort of crisis, where is the priority of supporting these events that have nothing to do with your core mission?
Well, right now we provide support to Secret Service when they ask under an intergovernmental service agreement, and we currently have detailed, I shouldn't say detailed, they're on standby. We have 75 people on standby to assist with presidential security events over the course of the summer. We will likely be asked to do that.
Presidential or campaign?
Well, we'll be likely asked to do this at the conventions, wherever the Secret Service is providing
So there's
protection.
reports there's been over 250 events that TSA agents have been supporting.
We have supported events around the country. I've been working with the people who are asking for us to let them know that we're in our own crisis right now, and we'd like to have as many of those people back as possible.
Okay, so prioritization, you don't get to say no?
Well, with Secret Service, we support that because that's a pretty important mission, and we're for the federal government, we're the screening experts.
Look, I agree it's important to make sure that people that are attending these large-scale events are safe. but I don't see that anywhere within the core competency of TSA and your mission. Do you agree?
Our core mission is transportation security. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so is there possibly, would you agree if we can work on a better way to make sure that people going to concerts are safe while allowing you to focus on your core mission?
I would like to be fully focused on my core mission.
Okay, well, thank you. Secondly, I sent you a letter on April 12th asking a number of questions related to the issues that are at our hearing today. I asked if you'd get back to me by April 26th. It's about 29 days ago. I haven't heard back from you yet. I was wondering when I might be getting an answer to this letter.
Let me find out. I'm
Okay.
not sure why you don't have an answer.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to put my letter into the record and ask the Admiral to just respond in writing for the record as part of this hearing.
Without objection, so ordered.
Great, thanks. Tomorrow, Mr. Katko's subcommittee is going to be holding a hearing, bringing some of the representatives of airports. My CEO of Tucson Airport Authority will be there, which I appreciate. She participated in the roundtable that we had last week, where we had a very fruitful and vigorous discussion on some of their concerns and ideas. A couple things that we're seeing going on in a small airport like Tucson. People are paying the $85 to go through PreCheck. They're giving their biometric information to the government, but then they're showing up at the airport and the PreCheck lane is closed. We have 2 terminals, and on average, the PreCheck lane's only been open 5 hours a day total for the 2 terminals, with really little to no flexibility. So this is a concern we're hearing really from around the country, that if people are going to spend the money and the time to go through it, the PreCheck lane needs to be open. Are you aware of this issue, and is there anything in the works to rectify this?
Yes, I am aware of that issue, and my goal is to get those pre-check lanes open throughout the day so that they're available when passengers arrive. Some of that is a staffing issue, and some of that is a scheduling issue. And so the focus that we're putting now on daily, hourly operations is showing us where we're having that problem. Some of that is just best practices across the system, and some of that is availability of people to go through that. In the absence of that, the other thing that we're doing is dramatically changing the way we move people through. So you move pre-check people right to the front of the line, and you get them through in a pre-check way, even if it's a standard line. So opening up the pre-check lane or the line, even if you don't have enough people to open that lane at that moment. And so you have to build enough capacity or build enough volume to justify pulling, the bodies off to open a pre-check lane. But this is my goal is to make sure that if we're going to promise a service to people, that you can deliver that service across the system.
Great. One of the other themes of that roundtable, and I'm sure we'll hear it again tomorrow on the record, is the feeling by the airlines and the airport authorities that the lack of flexibility by the FSDs to work in partnership with the airlines and the airport authority to make tactical decisions. They feel like there's a top-down approach coming from Washington, D.C. In Tucson, this is even worse because we're part of this spoke operation where our FSD is in Phoenix. So even if you're giving flexibility to that person, the leader down in Tucson is still stuck with these top-down answers coming out of Washington, D.C. and sometimes Phoenix. Are you willing, this shouldn't take an act of Congress, are you willing to sort of relieve some of that and allow more bottom-up decision-making so that the leader on the ground for TSA at that airport can make more decisions?
Absolutely. In fact, that's the message I've been sending out consistently to my field leaders. So I think I go back to my military model. If I'm a field commander, and I have resources, I know what my mission is, then I want to be able to do that to the best of my ability and reach out as I need for additional
Well, they're being
help.
told their hands are tied and that they're being directed by Washington, D.C. when the pre-check lane
Well,
will
I have
open
new
in
leadership
Tucson.
now that isn't following that model,
Okay.
and I've made it very clear that they do, and I'm checking on that to
Right.
make sure that they're
Things
actually
like that
doing
shouldn't take an act
Yeah.
of Congress, as you know. That's-
No, it took an act of me, and I said, look, that's the way things have to happen.
Great, thanks. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, for going over. Appreciate it.
No problem, thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank you and your staff for helping us and providing feedback on a bill I introduced last month that already passed the committee in a bipartisan fashion regarding perimeter security and access control points. I appreciate that and your actions. 2 things on the wait times. I've spoken with airport operators regarding the need to establish really a more formal process in which airport operators and carriers can share predictive data. How many seats on a flight, where the flights are, and try and make that as live time, as functional as possible. I want to know where you are on that and how easily that can be done, given your personnel. Number 2, I'll just ask you both of them. Several federal agencies utilize private explosive detection canine programs. I mean, we use this in the State Department. We use it in some of the most dangerous places in the world to help keep our people safe. It's my understanding that TSA hasn't expressed the willingness to turn to these type of programs despite requests from airport operators. We've had committee testimony where the Airlines for America and Cargo Airlines Association have testified and expressed their support for that. The DHS Aviation Security Advisory Council voted 16-1 in support of these recommendations, moving towards a certification program. Can you tell us, given the minimal supply and the growing demand, what TSA can do to improve this situation, to incorporate more canine screening, whether or not there's an openness to these programs?
Well, I'm open to that program, and in fact, I've had a number of conversations with people about private screening.
Do you have the resources to move forward and expand that then?
Well, but if by resources you mean kind of an oversight staff to pay
Money.
attention to it, we've got I have the staff I have, which manages the current canine program, and they can work with private vendors who are interested. The challenge associated with that is we also have to work through local law enforcement because, as you know, there has to be protocols established for if a dog finds something, what do I do now? And so local law enforcement has a say in this as well. So airport by airport in the local law enforcement.
So you think
works
the
with that.
inhibiting factor isn't money or the number of these resources available? It's only just coordinating with local law enforcement?
No, I didn't mean to imply that was an inhibiting factor. I think part of it is the willingness of TSA to explore this, and so I'm willing to do that, and I've said that to the
We're
people
hearing
who've come
from so many
forward.
groups in front of this committee how valuable that would be, how it would move
I
the
think
lines
I think
along,
we should explore the
and
options.
how it would improve safety.
Exactly. I think we should explore the options, particularly when you're thinking about cargo screening and other types of things that are off airport property that has to be done. So I think there's value there.
I mean, we've worked in this committee with Joint Terrorism Task Force, working with law enforcement. It would seem to me that we'd be able to function with this as well if we can provide any assistance or if the Joint Terrorism Task Force models are helpful. But it's really important, I think, to upgrade that. I think they also serve as a very visible deterrent.
There's no doubt with dogs. With respect to predictive data, it is relatively straightforward. We're doing that right now with the airlines. So the operational cell that I've got focused daily now, which I intend to become a permanent feature, includes airlines and airports to provide that predictive data, so that, but in more real time. Not just after the fact. I mean, it doesn't help me to find out what happened last week. It's much more important to find out what's coming and then to do something about it in near real time.
Yeah, if you could keep me informed in terms of the K-9 program, where that is, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for the success that you're doing under really tough situations. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Donovan.
Thank you, Chairman. Admiral, thank you for your testimony, your candidness with this committee. We saw with the shooting in LAX, I guess last year, and what happened in Brussels, the vulnerability of the non-secure areas of our transportation hubs. Is that the total jurisdiction of like the state and local authorities, or does TSA have a role in the non-secured areas in our airports?
Well, we have a role in assisting with setting standards and expectations. My primary role is at the checkpoint, down in the baggage area, and then out in the secure areas of the airport. And we work very closely with local law enforcement to patrol and guard the public areas of the airport as well.
I know last summer, it may have happened actually before your appointment, there was the covert testing at TSA and the vulnerabilities of things going through. And some changes have been made. Have you found that those changes have improved our ability to detect things going through our checkpoints that shouldn't? And is there like data that supports that?
There is, and I won't get into details in an open setting, but I can tell you that our own internal testing tells us that we've improved significantly. We have a ways to go yet, but it's significantly improved over, I think, the measures that we took, the retraining that we did, and the changes in focus have helped considerably. I've recently met with the Inspector General. They're about to kick off a new round of tests, specifically testing our improvement. That'll take place over the course of the next few months. They don't tell you the exact schedule for obvious reasons, but I look forward to working with him and understanding what he's finding and if he's validating any of what we're finding.
Wonderful. And my last question actually is, with your efforts to get more people on pre-screening and off of standard lines, does that just move the delay over to pre-screening?
No, it actually dramatically improves the ability to move. You can move almost double the speed on a pre-check line that we do. So, for example, right now, even with the dramatically increased numbers that have enrolled in pre-check, 92% across the entire system, 92% of people in pre-check wait less than 5 minutes for screening. So that's a significant improvement.
And with the increase of people going to pre-screening, you think that standard would uphold?
I do, because we can now more consistently, to Congressman McSally's point, we can more consistently open the pre-check lanes and open more of them, because you need volume to justify keeping the lanes open, and that volume is now giving me the ability to keep more lanes open.
Thank you very much, Admiral.
Yes, sir.
I yield back the remainder of my time, Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral. I represent Baton Rouge and New Orleans. In New Orleans, one of our biggest economies is the tourism industry, which means our airport is vitally important. So if you're talking Mardi Gras, Jazz Fest, or Essence Fest, or any of the events, the last thing we want is people to come down and have a good time and then have a bad taste in their mouth because they waited in airport line or they missed their flight. So specifically, do the FSDs have the ability to grant overtime if they need more employees?
They do, and I pushed a lot of overtime out to the FSDs. You got a great FSD down there too, by the way.
We do, and we have some hard-working TSAs, and unfortunately, we had an incident last year.
You did.
Where we had to use deadly force, and it was done by the book. What about K-9 teams? Because that's another thing that they expressed. We had it for Jazz Fest. It worked tremendously well. So the question becomes, can we get a permanent one? And as you expand your 10-point plan or implement it, where would we fall on the list?
Well, I'll get you the exact priorities on the list for the record, but I will tell you I'd like to expand our K-9 passenger screening K-9 program beyond what we currently have. So right now I've pushed K-9s to the largest airports where we're experiencing some of the biggest challenge. My goal and my plan is to backfill those as we can bring more K-9s on board. I'll find out where New Orleans is on that priority list.
And I've read and I know about your goal to increase pre-check passengers. One idea that I think that, let me just say offhand, I'm opposed to the baggage fees. I think it's abominable. The price of gas has gone down and been very low for the last year or so. Airline ticket prices have remained the same. I think baggage fees is just another way to dig in American people's pocket and make excessive money. But at the same time, I think that what it does is it pushes those carry-ons through our security checkpoints, which means our margin of error, if it's 1% or 0.1%, now that we have millions and millions more bags because airlines are doing their fees, I think at some point we ought to just prohibit them. But if we want to push people to pre-check, why don't we just say anyone who has pre-check, the airlines can't charge you baggage fees? And that would drive people to go enroll in pre-check, and we get to not stick it to the airlines, but we get to help the American people. But do you think that the number of bags going through our checkpoints is problematic?
There's a lot of pressure on the checkpoints. We see a lot of bags coming through the checkpoint, about 4 times at the checkpoint of what gets checked. And so this is why we encourage the airlines to help enforce that 1+1 rule, because every additional bag coming through the checkpoint is a potential slowdown to the processing of people through.
Because what I notice, and probably many of the people on the committee, since we travel so much, we will notice that once you get to the gate, when they make the announcements, most of them say that flight's pretty full, we'll complimentary check your bag. So you have had this backup at the checkpoint, and once you get through the checkpoint and you get to the gate, they say, hey, how about we check your bags for you now for free? Well, if they're going to do that, they might as well do it on the front end, alleviate some of your pressure, and also help us protect the American people. So I really would hope that you look at that. Let me switch topics a little bit, and I know that you are going out for bid on, or you have an RFI out for your IT on your secure flight program. And I would just ask that you look at using shared services with the National Finance Center, which already, I think, does your payroll and some other things for you. They have a great software development team. It's already a branch of government. I think they can help you get your needs to market, or they can service you a little bit faster than the process you're going to go in. I think that they will save you a tremendous amount of money. So I would just ask that you all really entertain using a shared service with National Finance Center to develop the software for the secure flight program that you're looking for.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
The gentleman, Chair recognizes Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Neffenger, thank you for being here. Mr. Neffenger, as you know, I represent Georgia, and of course, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, one of the busiest airport in the world, this is a major problem, the backlog that we have there. In fact, I just stepped outside a few minutes ago to have a picture taken with some visitors from Georgia, and they were telling me this morning, that, you know, one of them commented, I only had to wait 30 minutes in line. Well, you know, it's unacceptable what's happening here, and I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. At Hartsfield, recently, they've just opened up the South Checkpoint and started using a new system, the radio frequency identification on the bins, so that they can put their stuff in there and they don't have to load the bins. Hopefully that's going to help some. You and I have spoken before about privatization. And as you know, in full disclosure, I'm really big on privatization. Atlanta and the bigger airports are indicating to us, or at least to me, that it's beyond the scope of a bureaucracy to be able to do this. And I just don't get a warm and fuzzy feeling that you're embracing privatization here. Congress passed the screening partnership program. Tell me what you're doing to implement that. We need to get to a point where you're on the other side of the table. You're asking the questions and overseeing this, as opposed to being here answering the question from us.
We've made a lot of changes to streamline that process. I was concerned that it takes a long time because it has to go out on bid, has to go out on contract, and the like. I have said repeatedly that the law allows for this. I will work with any airport that's interested. In fact, I have directed airports like Atlanta to go out and talk to San Francisco, because that's the only large, Category X airport that has a contracted screening force, and we'll continue to work with them. I think that there are things that we can do. We are somewhat hampered by the way the federal acquisition rules work. Remember, that's a workforce that's contracted to the federal government. Not to the individual
hold on,
airport.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to know, you say you're hampered. I want to know how I can help you to become unhampered.
Well, as I said, we follow the contracting rules under the federal government contracting requirements. It's a contract to the federal government, so I want to make sure that it's fair and it's open competition, and you have to give people the opportunity to participate in that. We'll work with anybody who wants to do that.
Well, understand that I want to work with you so that we can streamline that process. I still don't get the feeling that you're embracing it, and I want to know what you're doing to encourage it, the privatization of it.
Well, again, it's up to the airport to determine whether they want to do it. We advertise its availability. We make available information about it. There's a screening private partnership office that manages that. What I can offer you is to bring the person who's running that office up to outline what's changed over the past year, and what we do to make that information available to airports if they're interested and inclined.
Okay, a couple other things real quick. First of all, as you know, FLETC is in my district.
Yes,
That's
sir.
where you do your training. I think it's a great facility, does a wonderful job of training. We still incorporate that, even in the private sector. I mean, they can still be trained down there. And
I train the private screeners as well.
Absolutely.
Let's see.
Absolutely. So, it's not as if they're not going to get the same kind of training that we currently get for the employees. It's just going to be management. And it appears to me, by the conversations that I've had with some of the smaller airports, that that's where the problem is, that there's a void, a gap, if you will, between the local senior TSA reps and between the management up here in D.C., that they're not communicating. Can you speak to that?
You mean the FSDs in the field?
Yes.
Well, I felt that the same thing. That's why I've made some leadership changes and some structural changes to the way we do it. And I've pushed a lot of authority out to the FSDs. They already had that authority, in my opinion. They just needed to know that they could use that authority. And I've been trying to drive less operations from headquarters, because you can't drive operations from a headquarters. You got to provide guidance and resources.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah.
But you know, again, I feel like what's happening here is we're creating this giant bureaucracy that at some point we're not going to be able to ever break it down. And now's the time for us to start going more toward privatization so that we don't get this giant bureaucracy that obviously is not performing to the level that we want it to perform to. You know, one of the first things they taught us when we got in the Georgia legislature was, when you're in a hole, stop digging. And we need to stop digging because it ain't working the way it's working now. So I encourage you to look at this privatization and to push the privatization. That's the route that I would see us needing to go.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, appreciate you being here. I know it's been a long morning. I have some couple of basic questions, and I love your comments on the philosophy of getting passengers through checkpoints quickly versus security effectiveness, and how you balance that.
Oh, well, first and foremost, you have to be effective at what you do. We learned that lesson the hard way when the Inspector General report came out last year. So it was imperative that we refocused. And this was not, I will say, not the fault of the frontline workforce. They were doing exactly what they were told to do, get people through the line fast. And if you do that, you'll get people through the line fast, but you might not do your job very well. So that was the first thing. But you still have to ensure that you do it as efficiently as possible. Those two things are not mutually exclusive in my mind. There are efficiencies that we can gain in the way we deploy our people, in the way we employ them, and in the way they are managed. And I think an awful lot of the work that I'm doing is in really reforming and transforming the management piece of the organization, because that's where the greatest opportunity for fixing that is. So I think we can do a lot to improve throughput. And then there's a technological piece to it as well. TSA is still operating equipment that was operated for the past 30 years in terms of, with the exception of some of the upgrades to the software and the x-ray machines, the basic system still is a manual system. And so there are things we can do that will dramatically improve our ability to process people more efficiently while still doing our job really well.
Good copy. The next question, and I know this is about how TSA works with with individual airports, and I know the answer is going to be it depends, right? But are you getting the kind of support from airports when they build a new terminal? Are you getting the opportunity to provide input and guidance on how to design it in such a way that it would improve efficiencies of security? Are you also, do you get the kind of support, you don't run the airports, right? And I think folks forget that, that are you getting the kind of support from the airport personnel on non-security tasks that could be going on? I just welcome your kind of general thoughts on that.
Well, thanks. With respect to the last point, we've gotten some great support from airlines and airports over the past few months to provide assistance for non-security related duties, everything from monitoring exit lanes to bin running to helping guide people into the appropriate checkpoints. So I've been very pleased with that. What I believe is that TSA needed to do a better job of engaging at the local level, airport by airport, as well as at the federal level. I think we'd always had pretty good relations with the big associations, but it's on the ground at the individual airport where the difference is made. And so we've been working very hard at pushing our people, going back to that comment about the FSDs and authorities, is to get them engaged with their local people, share with them their staffing models, share with them their current challenges, learn from each other, and more importantly, find out when they've got plans to modernize or improve their infrastructure, because that's an opportunity for us to build in some new capability and some new space that would allow us to operate better.
Great. And my last is a comment, not a question. I just want to say thank you for working with us on getting some TSA agents back into small airports in some of these small towns. And I know
Sure.
we've been talking a lot about wait lines at big airports, but I'm looking forward to flying back to Washington, D.C. from Del Rio, Texas in the next couple of weeks once that gets set up. So appreciate your willingness to work with us and making sure that these small town airports and these small town benefit from the economic advantages of having a functioning airport. So thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Neffenger, thank you for being here today. Earlier this week, Kelly Hogan was removed from his post as head of the security operations. In another committee recent hearing, in fact, we talked about that, you and I, and some of the questions there. We talked about the $90,000 bonuses as well. It's not where I want to stay or camp too much this morning, but I do want to ask a couple questions in regards. What is Mr. Hogan's annual salary?
He's an SES level, so his annual salary is I believe right around 180,000.
Yeah, I've got 181, so I think we're pretty close on that. And can you confirm if Mr. Hogan is on paid administrative leave?
He is currently on paid administrative leave, yes, sir.
Okay, so if my math in my head, that's about $500 a day. According to the DHS's administration leave policy of 2015, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
I'd like to read it for the record, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Objection so ordered.
The policy states managers must decide whether the continued presence of the employee in the workplace may pose a threat to the employee or others, result in loss or damage to government property, or otherwise jeopardize legitimate government interests. Where such a risk does not exist, the employee should remain in the workplace. So, Mr. Neffenger, in the case of Mr. Hogan, which of these instances applies?
Mr. Hogan is currently, we're resolving this. As you know, I wanted to make a leadership change. I made that leadership change. It was my considered opinion that I needed a new direction going forward. We are working the process with respect to Mr. Hogan, and I will work that process very rapidly.
So I'm not sure that, let me rephrase the question here. Why is it that you have made the choice to put him on paid administrative leave when there doesn't seem to be any threat to the
It's
organization?
a very short-term decision. It's to allow us to make the process for what the next steps are with that. Well, I can move forward with the new direction that I need to ensure we meet the challenges coming forward.
Sure. And I want to respect that. So when you say short-term, can you give us a ballpark, an idea? What does that mean?
I intend to determine that this week.
Okay. All right, I want to go back also, and where there's tough places to dig out, there's places, but also where I want to commend you. In the past, the TSA has had involuntary or voluntary moving expenses in the neighborhood of $200,000. I believe the one gentleman testified from Maine that he had $100,000 relocation expense. Is it my recollection, if my memory serves me correct, that you're no longer operating under that particular mindset of those procedures? Is that correct?
Oh, I discontinued that practice.
Okay.
And I've capped relocation expenses.
All right, and I appreciate you doing that. Let me follow up one more question here on Mr. Hogan. In the same memo which announced Mr. Hogan was no longer assistant administrator, you announced a new chief of operations who will direct nationwide screening operations and oversee daily allocation of forces and capabilities. According to your website, TSA's assistant administrator for security operations is responsible for, quote, airport checkpoint and baggage screening operations. Is that true? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So in concluding with Mr. Hogan, before I move on to something else here, are you at a place where that you can reveal any long-term plans with Mr. Hogan at this point?
I cannot at this point, no, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, we will certainly respect that. I've got a pretty general question. I've got a minute and a half left, and I want to give you an opportunity. The overall culture of the TSA has not been where the American people expect it, where Congress should expect it, where the taxpayers should expect it. Briefly, can you tell me, philosophically perspective, why do you feel like that you're being able to turn this tide? We've heard several members talk about it today, that you're undergoing an impossible, or trying to take on an impossible task. That probably doesn't encourage you very much today. Obviously, with your background, you would have not taken on this position unless you felt like there were improvements that could be made and things that could be done. You can share a couple specifics if you like, but I'd like to hear an overall general preview of why you think that you're able to turn this ship in the right direction.
Well, let me start by just talking about our workforce. We have a really tremendous workforce, and I don't just say that lightly. I've been out meeting with them in the now 10 months plus that I've been in the job. And I go out to the front line. So we have people they come from all walks of life. There are people with graduate degrees, with undergraduate degrees, some high school graduates. There's people who are former military, people in their second careers. And so what gave me immediate hope was seeing not only the passion and the dedication of that workforce, but their resilience. I really believe they have one of the toughest jobs in government. I mean, the average screener at a large airport sees more than 13,000 individuals every day. And they have to remain professional, and they have to remain committed, and these are true public servants. That said, I think they needed a clear sense of mission, a clear focus from leadership on mission. They needed that focus to stay constant and straightforward. I think about my time in the military. What is it that makes the military able to take people from all walks of life and focus them on their duties and have the kind of response that we have that has created the best military in the world? It's a clear sense of purpose and mission, a reminder of that, an engagement in that across the workforce. So I was surprised to discover when I came to TSA that there was no true formal training program across the entire organization, at any level of the organization. To me, that's foundational to creating culture and to creating engagement. So it was very important. I was really pleased that Congress agreed that founding a TSA Academy for the first time ever was a very important first step. It's a first step. I wanted to get that frontline workforce back engaged and connected in a way that they hadn't been before. I mean, we were just training people all over the country, and individuals, inconsistently. So now we have a consistent training program. You need to do that across the entire workforce. I started for the first time ever this year a Rising Leader Development Program, which looks at all of our mid-grade employees and begins to teach them about what it means to be in charge and leading. So we need to do leadership training, we need to do skills training, and we need to do it consistently. The reason I believe the ship can turn is I look to where the United States military was post-Vietnam, and everybody said it was a broken organization, and it turned itself around. And how? By doing exactly those things, focusing on the mission, re-engaging with the workforce, going back to fundamentals and training across the board. I believe that's the answer. It doesn't happen overnight, but we're already seeing some good signs with some of the new people that have been coming out of the academy. There's already this sense of passion. I should share with you some of the emails I'm getting.
I would just say my time has expired, so it'll be up to the chairman to extend that. So, but I do appreciate your answers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Ratcliffe.
Thank the chair. Administrator Neffenger, thank you for being here today. Over the course of the last year, as you know, we've had hearings on this committee on security breaches caused by improper screening of employees of airports and airlines and vendors. We've had hearings about the agency's trouble with excessive waste and cost and some security failures, specifically a hearing on the DHS IG's investigation that showed that we had as many as 95% of some banned security items being able to get through, and with aviation workers with links to terrorism not being disclosed. I say all that not to lay blame with you, but to highlight that you were brought in at a very challenging time at the TSA, and clearly there's a lot of work to be done here. And I do want to say that I have noticed that you have taken proactive steps to try and rectify some of these problems. But now today we've got another problem to talk about. These long lines are not just an inconvenience to travelers. They do pose a security risk. Having hundreds of passengers standing close together in an unsecure area. We saw what happened in Brussels with respect to that, and I know that the TSA is working every day to try and prevent those types of things that happened in Brussels from happening here. But I do want to follow up in this particular area, because I know you've attributed some of the long lines to personnel departure at TSA in previous years, and that the agency has not yet replaced some of those folks. And I know that through the Appropriations Committee, we've repurposed, Congress has repurposed some $34 million to allow for the hiring of additional TSA agents. But I have some concerns about the allocation of additional TSO agents. It's not just about getting screeners to the airport, but about allocating those resources strategically to alleviate some of the long lines that we're seeing right now. And to that point, I know there was a transportation security roundtable last week where stakeholders repeatedly said that they thought that the staffing model at the TSA was fundamentally flawed. Now, no one wants to sacrifice security simply to lower wait times at the airport, but if you or if we can improve efficiency of security processes without sacrificing safety, I know that's something that we all want to get to. So I've heard in the past that TSA had the capability to schedule its workforce to match up with the airline flight schedules and passenger load, but that it dropped that and instead now uses an electronic time and attendance system that has a lot of requires a lot of manual changes to deal with employees on leave and irregular operations and weather-related delays. First of all, is that correct?
Well, we do use an electronic time and attendance system, but we still have the flexibility to meet demand. I just don't think we did it very well.
Okay. Well, can you tell me, are you looking at any commercial technology solutions that would align workforce needs with airline and airport passenger flow? And if so, when would that be deployed?
Well, what we have done immediately is we're working with the airlines directly and the airports. I opened up the full staffing model to the airports, to the airlines in particular, about 2 months ago. We had all of the major airlines in at a very senior level to say, here it is. And we are airport by airport where anybody wants to look at it, looking at that staffing model as well. I think that there is work to be done on the staffing model. It needs to be flexible and agile enough to meet the demand as it arrives. And what I'm learning is that the airlines are exceptionally good at predicting and responding to their peak periods, and we can learn a lot from them, and they're helping us adjust our staffing model. And we even saw in Chicago a couple of the key adjustments that we made right after that day that we had all the challenges. It dramatically decreased the line waits.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're engaging the airports and the airlines in that regard. And to that point about the staffing model, are you taking into account the different layout structures of different airports? So, for example, the DFW airport in my home state of Texas has 15 screening checkpoints, where I know the Denver airport only has 3, and obviously that makes a big difference in terms of staffing requirements. Is that something that's being taken into account?
It is, and you have to do that because what you say implies the real challenges. And some airports are big and open and have lots of opportunity to run efficiently. Other airports are very constrained by space, and you have multiple small checkpoints distributed across the airport. So you have to think very differently about managing those more constrained airports than you do a large open airport.
Well, in that same vein, my time's expired, but I do want to ask you this question as well. Do you think that federal security directors located at the airports should have more flexibility in determining the local needs of the airports where they're stationed?
Well, I've given them complete flexibility. That said, it's important to note that I only have so much staff to go around. So if they come to me and say, I want 500 more people, I mean, I've got to work with them to get there. But within the resources that they currently have allocated to them, they have the ability to flex those resources however they need to, working with the local airports and airlines. And then if they need more, then they have the ability to come to me and say, look, I think I need more, and here's what I need.
Well, thanks very much for being here today, and thank you for your candor and your testimony and in answering questions today. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Just want to remind members that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., the Subcommittee on Transportation will be holding a hearing with airline authorities, airport authorities, and airlines, and look forward to that perspective tomorrow. Members of the committee may have additional questions. We'd ask that you respond in writing, and the ranking members recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just like unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter to Administrator Neffenger dated April 19, 2016.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, the hearing record will be open for 10 days for statements and questions from members. Let me, Admiral, thank you for being here today. I know you're a newcomer to this job, and certainly the challenges are great, but I think you're well equipped to solve those, and we look forward to working with you to solve these problems for the nation. And we thank you for your service. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.